Okay, I did that. Okay, so we have about 1 minute left. Ednice, when we hit 10:30, you will start the webinar, close the practice session. Let us know before you're doing that. And again, Chuck, once you hear from Ednice that she's done that, then you'll do that soft shoe, welcome people for about 10, 12 seconds, and then you can go ahead and start. Don't wait for us to give you that green light. Just give it 10, 12 seconds and then go for it.
Okay, and I'll see a prompt from Ednice that we're live.
Oh, she'll let us know
okay.
that she's about to do it.
Cool. Thanks, Joel.
Have a good show.
Thank you.
Three, two, one. Starting webinar now.
Welcome, everybody. We're just going to let folks join into the summit here. So we're going to take just a little bit of time, but we'll get started in just a moment. Again, we're just going to let people filing in as people join the summit here. We're so excited to have you. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning. My name is Chuck Schofield. I am Executive Vice President of Share Our Strength, and I work with the team on our No Kid Hungry campaign. And it is my pleasure to welcome each of you to the 4th annual Rural Summit. This year's Rural Child Hunger Summit is being co-presented by No Kid Hungry and Save the Children. We are so thankful for our partnership with Save the Children and the opportunity to combine our strengths to address rural childhood hunger. I encourage you to go to the end of your agenda to see the names of the team members who made this summit possible. As you can imagine, a gathering like this takes a lot of work and a lot of time, and we've got an incredible team on both the Save the Children side and the Share Our Strength team. But I really want to call a couple of folks out in particular. I'd love to read all the names, but in the interest of time, I just want to do a shout out to Valerie Hawkins and Chelsea McCormick of the Share Our Strength No Kid Hungry team, and Tamara Sandberg and her team at Save the Children. We're also so thankful to Land O'Lakes for sponsoring the 2022 summit and for their ongoing support to ensure kids get access to meals they need. Through its foundation and community relations work, Land O'Lakes is committed to helping end hunger and supporting rural communities and communities where its members and employees live and work. So again, thank you, Land O'Lakes, for helping make this event possible. During this 2-day summit, we will reboot through hearing success stories and highlighting best practices to address rural child hunger. We will reconnect with one another and come away with new skills and resources needed to redesign food programs and services for children in rural communities. We know rural communities face a number of challenges that lead to higher rates of food insecurity, such as a lack of transportation and poor infrastructure, making access to meal programs especially hard during the summer months, lack of broadband access that reduces the ability for online learning, and the use of online federal benefits, limited healthcare access, limited grocery store access, or access to healthy food, even while being the main producers of the food for the rest of the country. Our speakers today and tomorrow will really talk to us about how they share community strengths to overcome what seems insurmountable at times. Sessions will focus on unpacking the latest research, promising policy solutions, and the role of schools, community-based organizations, and local leaders as partners in the fight to end child hunger in rural communities. We've got great sessions focusing on creative solutions to the transportation limitations, how to bring healthy food into rural communities, and access to online services in innovative ways. Working together, we really can create equitable solutions for all rural children. As poet Joy Harjo wrote, "There will be no balance without all voices present in the power circle. We are making our grandchildren's world with our words. We perceive a world in which everyone sits at the table together with enough for everyone. So as participants are continuing to log on, I want to take just a moment to go over some housekeeping. As we get ready to kick things off, please note that the Zoom's chat and Q&A functions are currently disabled and will be available starting at 11:25 with our first panel discussion. Next slide. Throughout the summit, we really encourage you all to engage with No Kid Hungry and your fellow summit attendees and those in your network using hashtag Real Hunger and tagging No Kid Hungry and Save the Children. Next slide. English closed captioning is available through the entire summit. Please follow the steps on the screen to access closed captioning. If you're joining us via your computer, you can select closed captions on the bottom of your screen. English to Spanish translation is also available throughout the entire summit. Please select your preferred language by clicking on the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. Okay, it's now time for our leading session, which is a keynote featuring Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack and Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona, and moderated by CNN host and political commentator S.E. Cupp. In this session, we'll be hearing how both departments work together to uplift rural communities and how they are planning to ensure a future where all rural children have access to healthy food. This session was pre-recorded, so there will not be a Q&A segment. And again, I just want to thank each of you. We know how busy you are, and we know how integral you are to making childhood hunger and end that reality in rural communities. Thank you again for joining us, and we're so glad you're here. Without further ado, here's S.E. Cupp.
Welcome to No Kid Hungry's fourth annual Rural Child Hunger Summit. I'm S.E. Cupp. The theme this year is Reboot, Reconnect, Redesign, Building Equitable Solutions for Rural Children. I know we all probably realized during the unprecedented pandemic that many of our institutions and our ways of thinking needed a reboot and a new perspective. Child hunger, as many of you know, is not one problem. It's a constellation of problems, and it's impacted by everything from school meals and school consolidation to supply chain issues and even the opioid crisis. And as such, it requires more than a one-size-fits-all solution, especially for our rural children. So today we are honored to be joined by not one, but two cabinet secretaries to discuss some of the policy and new thinking that we need to address this staggering and frankly unacceptable problem. No kid in 2022 in America should go hungry. U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack and U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona join our armchair conversation now. By way of intro, Secretary Vilsack was confirmed as the 32nd U.S. Secretary of Agriculture on February 23rd, 2021. He was nominated by President Joe Biden to return to a role he served for 8 years under President Barack Obama. Secretary Vilsack was the longest-serving member of President Obama's original cabinet. Prior to his appointment, he served 2 terms as governor of Iowa, and he served in the Iowa State Senate and as the mayor of Mount Pleasant, Iowa. Secretary Vilsack, prior to returning to USDA, was also president and CEO of the U.S. Dairy Export Council from 2017 to February of 2021. Dr. Miguel Cardona was sworn in as the 12th Secretary of Education on March 2nd, 2021. Secretary Cardona previously served as the Commissioner of Education in my state, Connecticut, a position he held after being appointed by Governor Ned Lamont in August 2019. In this position, he faced the unprecedented challenge of responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, and he led the safe school reopening efforts in Connecticut. Secretary Cardona has 2 decades of experience as a public school educator from the city of Meriden, where he began his career as an elementary school teacher. He then served as a school principal and then led the work of performance and evaluation in the district. He assumed the role of assistant superintendent for teaching and learning. Welcome to you both. Secretary Vilsack, I'll start with you, and I'd like to give you some time for some opening remarks.
Well, Essie, thank you very, very much. And thank you for taking the opportunity to lift this issue up with your presence as well. Well-known commentator and author. It really lends a lot to the importance of this issue. And I want to thank my good friend, Secretary Cardona, for his amazing advocacy on behalf of America's children every single day as Secretary of Education. You know, it is great to be with all of you today, and I want to acknowledge the good work of Share Our Strength and Save Our Children are co-sponsoring this important summit. And I think it has 2 really key focuses. First, there is a focus on rural. You know, we have 3,100, almost over 3,100 rural communities with higher poverty rates than other parts of the U.S. In fact, 470 of those counties are persistently poor, which means that they've had poverty rates in excess of 19% for over 20 years. So it is important to focus on rural when we talk about children's nutrition. It's also important to focus on nutrition, especially for children. You know, we know that a leading cause of illness is poor nutrition, and children, especially in rural areas and children of color, have a higher risk of diet-related diseases and chronic diseases, obesity and diabetes as a result of poor nutrition. So it's important for us to focus on children's nutrition, particularly in rural areas. The USDA has been very active in this space. We understand and appreciate that today, unfortunately and tragically, over 10% of American households are facing food insecurity, which means that at some point in time during the month, they just simply don't have enough to feed their family adequately and completely. That's why it's important for the Biden-Harris administration to respond aggressively, especially during the difficulties of the pandemic. We increased SNAP benefits. We looked for ways in which we could help states with emergency allotments to increase higher benefits, particularly for the poorest of the poor, to be able to provide assistance and help. We increased the SNAP payment through examining the Thrifty Food Program, which is really the foundation for our Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, formerly known as food stamps. We looked at food prices. We looked at consumption patterns among families. We looked at nutrients and foods and the dietary guidelines and adjusted for the first time in 45 years the purchasing power of the SNAP program. We added a bonus to the Women and Infants Children program that helps 6.3 million pregnant women, young moms and dads and their children to be able to have greater access to fruits and vegetables. And we looked at our school feeding program, working with Miguel and his folks at the Department of Education. We looked for ways in which we could provide universal free meals. That meant 37 million children were able to receive nutritious meals at school. And we know from a recent study, it's the healthiest meal that they get outside of the home. And in fact, oftentimes, many of those children, this is at least half, if not all of the nutrition they receive during the school year. Unfortunately, Congress has not extended the universal free meal opportunity. So we're going to have to look at community eligibility, ways in which we can qualify schools for free and reduced lunch and universal free meals. That's going to take us from 37 million children being helped to 15 million children. So there's work to be done there. Summer feeding programs, expanded opportunities and additional resources for families during the summer months, looking for ways in which we can help schools as they combat and deal with supply chain challenges now to make sure that healthy meals are available to our youngsters. This is also true of work that we do in child care centers as well. Look, I'm just going to finish by saying there are real benefits to all of us, not just to our children, for doing this. Healthier kids mean less healthcare costs for the country. Healthier kids mean that they perform better in school, which means that we'll have a more productive workforce in the future. These programs also help to create jobs and support the economy. Food and agriculture is one of the largest employers in the United States, so it's important for us to focus on the benefits of these programs, This isn't just doing right by children, it's doing right by the country.
Thank you, Secretary Vilsack. And Secretary Cardona, I'll give you the same opportunity for some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, SC, for the introduction, but also for your passion around these topics. It's so important that we all come together around our children. I want to thank Secretary Vilsack. I can't think of a better partner in this work ahead of us, the important work that we have to improve outcomes for our students in the area of nutrition. And I also want to thank Save the Children and No Kid Hungry for convening the summit. It's such an important conversation because we all know kids struggle to learn when they're hungry. If their stomach hurts, their bandwidth for learning is diminished. The evidence is overwhelming. With access to nutritious meals, students miss fewer days of school. They're better able to concentrate. They're more energized. They're more motivated to engage in their learning. The hard truth is that food insecurity is a problem for millions of students in America every day. In fact, 75% of educators say they teach kids who regularly come to school hungry. And I remember as a fourth grade teacher always having a little stash of snacks in my classroom because there were students that came in that were hungry. This is particularly pressing in rural communities where poverty rates are higher and child hunger is more widespread. Each and every one of our students matter. Each and every one of our students deserve an opportunity to fulfill their potential and to live out their dreams. And while rural America grows what feeds the rest of our country, too often our students and families in rural America struggle with food insecurity themselves. No rural student or any student anywhere in our nation should ever go hungry. The president believes in a whole of government approach to address our most pressing challenges, including those faced by our rural students and our rural communities. I'm glad, as I said earlier, to share the virtual stage today with Secretary Vilsack as we continue our long-standing partnership with USDA. Together, we're working to provide timely information to states, to districts and schools on school nutrition and family eligibility for healthy meals. For example, we recently worked together to engage millions of students and families about expanded SNAP eligibility. And conversations like this one today give us the opportunity to learn from one another. I'm convinced together we can ensure that every student from every community has access to nutritious meals that lay a foundation for academic success and thriving lives. That starts with recognizing our vital role in school nutrition that the school nutrition professionals play in meeting our most fundamental needs of students. They've long been champions for children, especially throughout the pandemic when their services and commitment have been most urgently needed. It shouldn't take a pandemic for us to realize how important our food service and nutrition folks are in our buildings, but these past 2 years, they've served as heroes to the community. In a minute, we'll talk more about how the American Rescue Plan invests in efforts that keep our students healthy in school and learning. For example, the American Rescue Plan funds enable districts to increase staff capacity or cover labor costs associated with serving meals during a pandemic. I'm glad to hear this work is already underway and that communities from Texas to North Carolina are prioritizing cafeteria staff and school nutrition. I hope we have more opportunities to learn from one another as we work toward developing a strong community of promising practices. Moving forward, we'll commit to meeting students' basic needs, including ensuring that they have access to quality, consistent school nutrition. To get there, let's listen and share openly. Let's elevate what's working and always be willing to learn from one another. With that, I look forward to this conversation. I want to thank you again for having me.
Thank you, Secretary Cardona. I want to start with partnerships. You both talked about some ways that both of your departments are working together, and I mentioned how complex the issue of child hunger is. It requires a lot of moving pieces to address a lot of problem areas. That ideally includes some government solutions, community solutions, school solutions, and also maybe some private sector solutions. I was hoping both of you could talk about some of the partnerships you are looking to leverage as we try to focus on child hunger, and especially where getting meals to school children are concerned in rural areas. Secretary Vilsack, we'll start with you.
Well, I can think of a couple of key areas. First of all, working with the Department of Education, our partner, we are looking at expanding community eligibility. This is a way in which we could expand access to universal free meals by taking a look at schools that have a disproportionate number of kids who are free and reduced lunch, and basically saying it doesn't make administrative sense to basically distinguish between a small percentage of the population that can pay for meals and everyone else. Let's save the administrative expense. So working with the Department of Education to help us figure out who those schools are, where those schools are. There's another great partnership that occurs both with schools and with the community during the summer months. You know, we think of school meals, but that's only 181 days in the school in the year. What happens when those kids are on weekends? What happens during the summer vacation period? We've got aggressive efforts to try to promote summer feeding programs, and we partner with church organizations, we partner with service organizations, we partner with schools to be able to provide a decent meal during the summer. And here's an interesting partnership that you may not think about, the partnership between the Department of Education and universities and colleges. You go, well, what's that got to do with rural kids? Well, what it has to do is making sure that universities and colleges understand and appreciate that some of their students may qualify for SNAP. You know, the nature of college students today, and Miguel can probably talk about this much better than I can, has changed significantly. It's a lot different than when I went to school, that's for sure. And there are people that are struggling to try to do the education, try to do the job, and try to raise a small family with small children. And so the ability to get SNAP while qualifying and still being a college student is really important to their maintaining their educational opportunity and getting proper nutrition to students. So again, a partnership where we're basically making sure universities and colleges understand how to communicate that to students so they take full advantage of benefits. Those are three interesting examples, I think, and boy, there are just a ton more.
Yeah, and Secretary Cardona, go ahead and talk about some interesting partnerships that you think, are already happening or that you think need to happen.
Sure. You know, just talking about partnerships, I think it's really important that we look at this challenge differently. We really have to look at this crisis that we experience and look for the opportunities that might be there, that we have to think differently. We have to kind of reimagine what partnerships are. I can tell you, when reopening schools, we had to work more closely with people that we traditionally didn't work with at the Department of Education in Connecticut. I had epidemiologists on speed dial, right? Because that was needed in order to get our schools open. I want us to really rethink this throughout our country at the state level, obviously at the federal level, but at the state level, at the local level. How are we working with our community-based organizations whose goals are to end hunger, whose goals are to make sure families are okay and they're whole? We serve the same families. So first and foremost, just to really put an exclamation point on the importance that we need to think differently. We need to design our agencies differently to make sure that we're reaching out. And I'm proud to work with Secretary Vilsack and his team because we're doing that. I mean, we have our team, elementary and secondary offices calling the states. We're reaching out to the different states to talk about pandemic EBT because we know that if children have access to that and are able to have nutritious meals, they're more likely to learn. So that's totally different, right? And we have to just expand our thinking and say, we're all on the same team. Let's blur the lines between agencies. So whether it's SNAP eligibility, pandemic EBTs, or making sure that districts are designed to work with community-based organizations that exist out there to help end hunger, we have to create that mindset now that we have to do business differently. Our kids need us more now. I'm disappointed that in the omnibus, there wasn't an extension, but that means we have to double down our efforts to think outside the box, create a culture of collaboration and partnership, and just think differently, think outside the box to make sure we have access for healthy meals. So, and I appreciate Secretary Vilsack talking about the higher ed community. One thing that I'm noticing, I visited over 31 states in the last year. Universities, colleges are also thinking about the wraparound support that our students need to be successful, whether that's housing, but food insecurity is real. And we're seeing students at the college level take advantage of that. And because of that, they're able to continue their studies. So I love this thinking, not only working within agencies, but working at all different levels to make sure that we're sharing ideas and working together to end hunger.
And yeah, Secretary Cardona, let me stick with you for a minute because I want to talk about school budgets and how, like everywhere else, schools are strapped and trying to think creatively about getting meals to kids. I want you to speak briefly, though, about your role as an educator and what you saw when it comes to child hunger. Because I know when I talk about it, I really try to impress upon people that it's not just about hungry kids. It's the mental health aspect, the anxiety of being hungry and food insecure, not knowing where your next meal is coming from, and then asking a kid to learn in those conditions with that kind of stress, and to, you know, deal with school and social settings, all of that goes along with it. So talk about why child hunger is such an important issue to address inside schools and what that means for school budgets going forward.
Sure. So, you know, you think about Maslow's pyramid, right? The basic needs have to be met first. And let me just bring you back to March 2020. We closed schools, I think it was March 13th. We knew students, we thought it was going to be 2 weeks. And then it ended up being the remainder of the year where students were not in the schoolhouse. That didn't mean learning stopped, but it meant they're not in the schoolhouse. Before we talked about closing the digital divide, before we talked about mental health support for students, we talked about hunger. We educators across the country were thinking, how do we get the meals in the hands of these kids who were relying on their school lunches, school breakfast programs to have nutritious meals? So I'm so thankful to the food service workers throughout the country, especially in our rural areas. And they work with our bus drivers to make sure that meals were delivered to homes. So I just want to remind folks, before we were talking about the digital divide and broadband access or academic success of students or even mental health needs, we were talking about their basic needs of nutrition and making sure that they weren't hungry. That was the first thing we focused on when schools closed. And we need to keep that level of urgency throughout the country. So when it comes to school budgets, we need to start there. You can have the best laptops, you could have the best access to academic intervention, but if a student is hungry, doesn't have access to a nutritious meal, I call it the bandwidth for learning diminishes. So as we reopen and reimagine schools, as we think about school budgets, we have to prioritize. We have to start with what we started with in March of 2020, ensuring that children have access to meals, that their parents have access to whatever benefits they need. And I think our challenges moving forward are going to be a little bit different, SC. You know, many families haven't filled out data, haven't filled out paperwork around access to school meals. And we're concerned that many families in the fall are going to not have access. So we're working hard with USDA to make sure that we're getting the message out there. And we're encouraging, we're not recommending, we are encouraging the use of the American Rescue Plan funds, $130 billion for advocacy and communication and making sure families have access to the supports that they need. But also those money could be used to provide incentives to get more food service nutrition workers, to make sure that we have meals going to students if they don't have access to them at school. And I'm thankful for those on the Hill that voted for it, because not everyone did. The American Rescue Plan funds are part of the reason why our students are going to have access to meals, and that we can think differently because we have access to those funds. So we also need to, not only with the American Rescue Plan, but also with our budgets moving forward, prioritize putting an end to childhood hunger in our schools, because it doesn't matter how shiny the buildings are. It doesn't matter how much technology they have. If children are hungry, they're not going to learn as well.
Yeah, well said. Okay, Secretary Vilsack, I want to talk about nutrition security. If people don't know what that means, it's basically a consistent access to nutritious foods that promote optimal health, well-being, mental health as well, for all Americans throughout all stages of life. You mentioned all the way up through college age, where I think a lot of us think, well, by that point, you're self-sufficient. Not always the case. So can you talk about how your focus as Secretary of Ag on nutrition security will overlap with school meals, summer after school programs? What are some of those unique challenges in rural communities?
Well, Essie, I really appreciate you putting the focus on this, because all too often we talk about food insecurity, but we don't talk about nutrition security. You can be fed, but not well fed. And the reality is we have to not only make sure kids are fed, but they're well fed. It starts, first of all, making sure that kids have access to programs. Just to sort of dovetail on what Secretary Cardona just said, these school budgets are going to be impacted by the fact that universal free meals aren't going to be available because Congress didn't authorize an extension of the waiver in the omnibus bill. What does that mean? It means a 40% reduction in the nutrition budgets. And Will's absolutely right about the heroes on the line there. They've done a tremendous job. Well, now they're really going to be stretched to basically provide that nutritious meal. So to the extent that we can expand access to programs, universal free meals through community eligibility, that's an important consideration. We want to make sure that we have more partners. Again, when we don't extend the waivers, it makes it just a little bit more difficult to do the summer feeding sites. It makes it more difficult without the pandemic EBT and the extension of those resources during the summer months. So we need more folks to get engaged in this effort to make sure that kids have access. We need expanded outreach in some of our programs. Here's a sad statistic. Only 50% of eligible WIC folks are taking advantage of this program. That means that 50% of pregnant moms, young moms and dads, young children under the age of 6 are not getting the fruits and vegetables they could otherwise get if WIC was basically available to all 100% of eligibles. It means better nutrition in the schools, working with schools to make sure that we continue an effort on less sugar and less sodium and less fat and more fruits and vegetables and whole wheat. We're making an adjustment to the guidelines and the nutrition standards at schools to make sure that we're responding to the need for better nutrition. It means basically providing folks with tools. If you've got Alexa at home, you can essentially go, Alexa, give me a tip from my plate. And they'll give that, Alexa will give you a tip on nutritious meals in homes. And it means finally addressing the issue of food deserts. We have a healthy food financing initiative where we're trying to provide resources so that folks have access to full-scale grocery stores. You can talk about nutrition, but if you can't buy it, if you don't have access to it, we have a Reach and Resiliency grant program now that's trying to partner with food banks, another set of heroes, by the way, in all of this. So it's partnerships, it's expanded access, it's improved nutrition, it's better information and education.
And I know some convenience stores right now are even experimenting with trying to get fresh produce into places like Walgreens and CVS, sometimes where people do most of their shopping, because that's what's close by. So lots of different opportunities there. Okay, I want to shift over a bit to a different topic, but a really, really important one, and that's equity. Even before the pandemic, we know that there were racial and ethnic and class disparities when it came to servicing communities of color and rural communities, both in terms of education and nutritional needs. I think the pandemic exposed some of those into even clearer relief. So I'm hoping both of you can talk a little bit about how we're getting more nutrition in more equitable ways to communities in rural America. Secretary Vilsack, I'll start with you.
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, we have a very aggressive farm to school program where we're trying to provide the opportunity to link schools with their farmers and ranchers and producers so that kids have access in rural communities to what's being grown locally. It also creates more of a circular economy in that so that the resources, the benefits, the economic benefits of food nutrition basically stay in the community. We're working with the Institute of Child Nutrition to take a look at ways in which we could better train school nutrition professionals concerning the needs of minority populations. The dietary needs are different, and we need to be, I think, culturally sensitive as we structure menus at schools. We're working with our Office of Tribal Relations is working with a number of tribes in an indigenous food sovereignty initiative to try to make sure that we are, in fact, providing access to traditional foods prepared in traditional ways as a way of acknowledging the importance of nutrition in terms of minority populations. We're also doing a better job. We have more work to do on this, a better job of translating information that we have into a number of different languages. It's all well and good to have over 400 educational tools available on the USDA website, but if they're only in English, it means that you've basically limited the capacity of folks to access them. We've translated 136 of those nearly 400 items, and so we've got a ways to go, but 136 educational tools, 40 key recipes now being translated into Spanish, and more to come. So a variety of ways in which we can address and deal with this issue. I mentioned the Reach and Resiliency Grant Program. That's also a way of making sure that we're providing resources to these families in far and remote areas, working with food banks, not just to serve urban and suburban areas, but to make sure that they have access and programs that go out into those remote areas and provide reasonable access to fresh fruits and vegetables.
Well, you know, SC, I don't know that I can compete with Secretary Vilsack. He has Alexa sharing information for him. I have to step up at the Department of Ed. But look, you talk about inequities. Before the pandemic, the inequities in education and access were alarming. Yeah. We've almost normalized them in this country. And so the pandemic made it worse. It really brought to bear how some children in our country fared worse than others with this pandemic and access to health and access to nutrition. So there should be in all of us a greater sense of urgency than ever before to really address these things boldly and directly, right? And we have an opportunity now to make sure that we don't go back to how it was before the pandemic, because it was inequitable. And you know, we talk a lot about inequities, and I feel like, and I'm glad we're focusing on rural communities. One thing that I learned in the last 2 years is that rural communities took a hit in ways that other parts of our country didn't. In so many things, food insecurity, but also like access to internet, access to online learning. They really took a hit. So it's really important that we elevate the needs of our rural communities. And I want to lean in here on the American Rescue Plan and say, you know, you should be using the American Rescue Plan funds to address some of those inequities, especially for those students in rural communities that were hit harder or have lack of access. Secretary Vilsack talks about food deserts. You know, it's easier to get a bag of chips in most stores than it is fresh fruit. That's unacceptable. So how could we lean into these emergency funds to try to level the playing field a bit there? We provided at the Department of Education guidance. In our second handbook, we provided several handbooks, guidance on how to use American Rescue Plan funds or what you can use it on, to give freedom to rural communities to use it on things that might be unique to them. We also are proud that we set up an email, and I want to announce it today, rural@ed.gov, rural@ed.gov, very specific for rural communities. If they have questions about their challenges that are unique to maybe different places of our country, they should have specific responses based on their needs. And we want to make sure that we make that available to them. Yes, the inequities were made worse, but we should have a greater sense of urgency than ever before to call them out and to use these rescue plan funds to address those inequities, especially in our rural communities, because they have additional challenges that other folks maybe don't have in different parts of the country. And I think we need to be very explicit about those inequities that our rural communities face and be unapologetic about saying we need to do better. And that means that maybe there are the resources out of ARP that go to rural communities that may not be needed somewhere else. And we want to be able to help support rural communities as they're trying to figure out what that means for them and make whatever resources we can available to them, because we know that they suffer differently from different parts of the country.
Well, let me just follow up with you, Secretary Cardona. One of those inequities specific to rural communities is something I mentioned, school consolidation, when, 4 schools become one, and you might now have a kid traveling 40 minutes to get to school, maybe missing breakfast, maybe, presenting different challenges. I'm wondering if you can just talk briefly about school consolidation and the impact of that on child hunger.
Definitely. I mean, when you think logistically, having to put a student on a bus for that long to get to school, and then, you're adding a couple hours on both ends of the day to that child's day. How are we thinking about it differently and saying, what could we do differently? It doesn't have to go back to what it was. Or could we be looking at our funds to create dinner programs in schools, which I know some schools have? We've been talking a lot about extracurricular activities, after school programming to help kids catch up on what was missed. So could we then think about how to use some of these funds to put dinner programs in the schools? I've seen that done. Or ensure that maybe when we've used our buses to transport meals, could we bring meals to the bus stops? How can we think outside of the box, think differently, work with our partners in the communities, right? We don't have to think outside the box alone. Let's come together as communities and think, how can we get meals to our students in non-traditional ways so that they can eat? And if that means that when they get to the school, the first thing that they do is eat before we talk about academics, then we need to prioritize that. Again, hungry children have a harder time learning, so we have to make sure we think differently.
Yeah, and it just creates generational problems when you've got kids who go hungry and can't learn. They have developmental delays, and sometimes that can impact them for years. So it really is all of our problem, all of our issue.
Essie, can I just make a comment about this?
Please.
You know, it's important for people who are watching this to understand why rural matters. Here's why it matters. It's the place where most of our food comes from. It's the place where most of our water that we drink comes from. It's a place where most of the energy that we consume when we turn on the computer and the lights, it's the feedstock of all of that energy comes from rural places. It's the place of iconic landscapes where we all go to get away from it all. And it's a place that disproportionately sends young sons and daughters into the military in disproportionate numbers. So it's a really, really important place. And in order to avoid school consolidations, you have to have an economy that supports the value that rural America provides to the rest of the country. And that's something that the Biden-Harris administration is very focused on, understanding that we're really going to have to work intensely with resources targeted to these areas of persistent poverty in these rural communities so that they have an economy that basically allows young people the opportunity to stay or come back to the towns which they grew up in. They want to stay, they want to come back, but there's not the opportunity. And so part of this nutrition discussion has to also be about building a stronger and better economy in those rural places.
Really, really well said. Thank you. Before we go to our closing remarks, I really wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some folks you've already mentioned briefly, school staff and people who serve our children. And that cuts across so many different industries. And especially over the past 2 years, we've just seen nutrition staff at school, community organizations, neighborhood leaders, regular folks really step up to meet nutritional needs, whether they're donating food or organizing, meal service deliveries. And I know that many of those folks are in our audience today, watching right now, listening to you guys talk about an issue that's really important to them. And so I wanted to give you each a moment to maybe share a story or to thank them. I know you've already done that, but I wanted to give you a little space to kind of humanize just how important those folks have been over the past 2 years. Secretary Cardona, go ahead.
Thank you. Listen, I'm smiling because now that we're all vaccinated, hug a school nutrition person when you see them. What they did over these last 2 years is nothing short of heroic. I remember seeing tables set up outdoors with meals set up for families. I remember the long line of cars showing up at a high school, long line of cars with their trunks open and school nutrition expert coming out, bus drivers changing their schedules, changing their job description to make sure the kids in the community didn't go hungry. Superintendents who just coordinated the bus routes differently to make sure that meals were available to kids at their bus stop. I can go through, it really shows how schools are communities, how at the end of the day, our job is to care for our children, care for our families. And those folks who are now coming back, and we need to make sure we're showing them that we value them, not only by thanking them and, rolling out the red carpet, but also making sure they have good competitive salaries, making sure that this is a job where they can stay, they can feed their families, they can take care of their families with competitive salaries. Let's show them that we value them. All of our school teams and in the community as well. I mean, we had crossing guards delivering meals, teachers showing up, superintendents shifting their priorities to make sure our families were fed. I tip my hat to them, and I know our school reopening wouldn't be possible if it weren't for them, for our custodians who made the buildings accessible, safe, so that our families could have access to meals. I can go on and on, but I want to give Secretary Vilsack a chance to speak too.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
I don't think people understand how difficult this job has been. When we've talked about pandemic, but we haven't talked about the supply chain challenges that have been created as a result of the pandemic, where essentially you set a menu. When you think about your family's menu, you set it for, maybe on a Thursday, you're setting it for the week, and yeah, you got enough in the freezer to basically take care of everything. Well, what if you had to provide meals for 10,000 people in a week? And what if you were planning on having hamburgers on Monday and you were told on Friday that the hamburger supply that was coming wasn't coming, or wasn't coming to the level that you would allow you to feed 10,000 people? And then you had to essentially, on a dime, change and figure out what you were going to do in terms of making sure that those kids were well fed. The job that these people are doing is nothing short of remarkable. And there are two groups of heroes in all of this. The folks at the nutrition in the schools and the folks in these food banks. Unbelievable people. One of my favorites was a woman who started a place called Gourmet Gorilla. Now, honestly, when I went there, I thought, I'm not sure what I'm getting into here with a place called Gourmet Gorilla. But this woman had a vision, and the vision started with her mother, an Italian mom who was a great cook, and she had great recipes. And this woman, basically, these folks at Gourmet Gorilla said, you know what? Why not take mom's recipes, and instead of feeding a family of 4, let's feed 40,000. And so every single day, hundreds of people work online to produce mom's recipes that then go to schools across a very large area in Illinois. It's a remarkable thing where you take that passion for food and you convert it into providing help and assistance and a nutritious meal that looks nice, that tastes great, and is safe and nutritious. It's a remark, but it's just one of literally thousands of people who are doing this every single day, literally feeding 30 million kids over 5 billion meals during the school year. Nothing short of remarkable.
I love that. Well, I want to thank you both before we go to closing remarks for giving us your time and your thoughtfulness on these issues. As you can see, we've covered a lot of ground because a lot of things are involved when we talk about child hunger. And so I appreciate all your time on this and answering all of my questions. I hope we all learned a little something, but most importantly, how important this issue is to all of us, because we are, when it comes down to it, one community, and our kids have to be first and foremost. So Secretary Cardona, I'll leave it to you to do your closing remarks.
Thank you, Essie. It was great to be with you, with Secretary Vilsack and the others on the call. Thank you for organizing this. For me, it's an honor to be a part of the team at a time where our country needs us the most. The president always says, America is where we look for opportunity out of a crisis. And we have an opportunity here to do better. We have an opportunity to make our schools better than they were before, to partner better and with intentional collaboration, not only between agencies, but across different partners in the communities to make sure that our students are not hungry. And whether you're Superintendent Weiss in Juneau, Alaska, who set up new bus routes so that kids get meals delivered to their homes, or that social worker in Kansas City, Missouri, who set up a voucher program so children have access and allowed the community garden to be a place where students learn how to get food for themselves and just learn new skills during a time of need. Let's continue to come together. Let's maintain a high level of urgency. As our masks come off, it doesn't mean that we have to dissipate our level of urgency. There are too many hungry children out there, too many hungry families, and we have an opportunity to level up. And this could be an opportunity for us to really do better than ever before. The pandemic took a lot from us, but it doesn't mean that we can't come back stronger. And I look forward to working with Secretary Vilsack, with all of you on the call. And I want you to know that the Department of Education, we're rolling up our sleeves. We want to be partners in this work. It's too important not to do it better than ever before. Thanks for the time to have me speak here today.
Thank you. Secretary Vilsack, go ahead.
Well, I think Secretary Cardona did a great job of explaining how we need to take this terrible process that we've been through, this terrible crisis that we've been through, and basically emerge from it stronger and better. Let me add to that notion the importance of this in terms of our country. It's pretty clear that if kids are well fed, they're going to be healthier, and healthier kids means less healthcare costs, means better performance in school, and a more productive workforce. But let me suggest to you, it also means a stronger democracy. And that's why this work is so incredibly important. If you look at the world today and you look at the places where there is conflict and chaos, what you're going to find are two constants. One, a lot of hungry people and a lot of unemployed people. The reason we have security in this country is in large part because we have nutrition programs and we have unemployment assistance and help so that people going through a tough period can survive. So to the extent that we have 10% of our families food insecure, that's 10% of our citizenry that aren't in a position to be as productive and contributing as much. So it's in our best interest, collective best interest, to make sure that we eliminate children who are hungry, that we do so in order to create this more secure nation of ours that allows us to have a stronger democracy, that allows us to provide leadership around the world in terms of a democracy. And we know that we're engaged right now in somewhat of a conflict between democracy and autocracy. And the reality is we have to win this. And to win it, we got to have our kids well-fed and well-educated and well-prepared. So it isn't just the right thing to do. It's the smart thing to do. So I look forward to working with the partners on this call to figure out creative ways in which we can continue to focus on food security and nutrition security so that every single child in this country reaches their potential because they're well-fed and well-educated.
Thank you, Secretary Vilsack, and thanks again, Secretary Cardona. And thank you so much to Share Our Strength and No Kid Hungry. It was an honor to join all of you, and I'm grateful that discussions like this at this level are happening. So thanks to you all.
Worrying about where I'm going to eat and what I'm going to eat should not be a worry of a child.
I couldn't really believe that this is happening in America. Kids actually being hungry.
The pandemic changed how we did things, but didn't change what we did. And what we do is feed children.
I want to make sure that our children have whatever they need.
They don't have to. They're choosing to wake up early every day to come and give us food, and I'm thankful for that.
And it was like, it's a miracle.
I fed a lot of kids today.
We cannot fail the children.
That level of commitment is something that should really be appreciated, and I want that to be seen.
Thank you.
There is a saying in Africa, it's called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu means I am because of we. We did this.
We're like one family when we come together. That's what's important about our community.
We're a small town. We are definitely rural.
In this community, we don't have any grocery stores. We are actually in a food desert.
People forget that it's a challenge sometimes just to travel.
They lack access to healthy foods like fruits and vegetables.
We partnered with Save the Children to hand deliver bags of fresh fruit and vegetables to our families with children.
We like the variety of fresh fruit and vegetables and the recipes that are added into.
We give food vouchers out to communities and partner with nonprofit organizations like Save the Children to find out what families are in most need.
It's a blessing to be able to give them those $50, $100, $200 gift cards.
Les va a ayudar a muchas familias comprar comidas, tener algo que comer en sus casas y nos va a hacer mucho la ayuda que nos van a dar.
We are serving kids and families who may not have the transportation to get to meals. So what we've done is we've loaded the van and we are here passing out those meals and those food supplies.
Because of our partnership with Save the Children, we were able to expand to more rural areas.
Save the Children came in and helped us with the farmers market, all to try to provide fresh fruit and vegetables to our communities that are in a food desert.
Save the Children means a lot to these families.
I can make anything out of everything I've been given. Nothing goes to waste, and it's helping us, my family, my kids.
You can't do these programs alone. We need each other to be able to be successful.